one of the one of the people I've had on there was your very own Yunus Musa, who plays for USA national team. So I grew up playing against Yunus when he was at Arsenal, and I played with him when he was at Cheltenham. I played with him in the England under 15s and under 16s international youth teams. So that's how I know him there. So I've had him on my Beyond Football podcast where he's given insights into his experience of playing against Messi, Ronaldo, Marcelo, and just asking him that question of who he is beyond football.
He is first off, a footballer, a fan of the beautiful game, a content creator. His channel's already blowing up past the 2,000 mark. I have a feeling he's going to be at 10,000 and beyond in no time whatsoever. I'm so excited that he's here from across the pond. We have Daniel Jinadu here on Box to Box today. Daniel, how are you, my man?
I'm all good. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be on here and to connect with you, Jose, because, I know football's growing over there. So let's get into it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'm so excited that you're here. And yeah, football's growing. I like to think that it's taking over, and we'll definitely talk about how you feel, because I think, you have such a unique perspective. You've obviously seen, football here in America firsthand. You've seen what it looks like. You create content around the beautiful game, but you do also live overseas. And so I think there's going to be a ton that you can offer to our audience today in terms of value, but we'll definitely dig into it. Before we get there, though, our audience already knows the question I'm going to ask to every single, guest on the pod. Daniel, who are you today?
Wow, who am I today? Well, I would say you alluded to it before. I'm a footballer. I'm a final year psychology student. So I'm just about to graduate from my undergrad course over here in the UK. I'm a content creator. I'm a brother, a son. I'm a Christian. There's many aspects to me. Yeah,
I love it, man. I love it.
That we can dive and explore today. Yeah, those are just few.
I love it, bro. I love it. Yeah, and look, there's no wrong answer, right? I think the reason, and I think I've talked about this very lightly on the pod before. The reason why I like to start with that question is because I think that you probably know this, right? As a content creator, as a footballer, so often by the public or by audiences, in any corner of the internet, we're typically put into this box, right? We're defined by our content. We're defined by our style of play, whatever it may be, the badges and the clubs that we support. And I feel like sometimes that can feel a bit unfair. And so I think that the first question I want to ask when a guest comes on the show is, who are you today? Give you a chance to define yourself, right? I think that, to me, that's super important. And I think that it's a great way that you just kind of, summarized who you are and what you do. So let's jump into it, man. We're going to talk about your journey. We're going to start at the very beginning, as we always do. Me personally, I'm excited today because I think that your journey is going to feel probably a little bit similar to mine. I grew up living, breathing, sleeping, eating this sport. I didn't really know that it was even called soccer until I don't know how old, maybe 9 or 10 years old, when I started actually playing, and being less of a fan. But look, man, I want to hear about your perspective and how you grew up around this game. So let's start at the beginning, right? Your earliest memories of football. Where did it all begin for you, and who were maybe some of the people in your life that kind of helped grow that fandom that you had?
Yeah, so my earliest memories were probably in primary school, where I've just let me fix this quick.
No worries, you're good. Go for it.
The sun, but yeah, probably in primary school where I used to play a lot of different sports because I grew up in Ireland, and we used to play Gaelic. We used to play a few different things, but then I started getting into the game of football when I followed my older brother to training for our local Sunday league team when I was about 7. And then from there, I just fell in love with it. I've always been quite big for my age. So when I followed my brother to training, I went in goal for the session because, no one really wants to be a goalkeeper at that young age. But I went in goal. Yeah. I was making saves and everything, and I enjoyed it. And there was a lot of transferable skills between Gaelic and football. So I just stuck with it, joined my own age group, Sunday league. And then, yeah, it's just been pushing since then.
Yeah, man, I love that. So Ireland, I mean, and that's interesting, right? I mean, growing up there versus, and I don't know how that compares to maybe other countries in the broader United Kingdom, and how they embrace the sport versus other sports that you have access to. But at what point, you mentioned you started off, following your brother, got an opportunity to play keeper. So at what point did you start thinking, man, I kind of like this. I like playing the sport. There's obviously so much fandom around it where I live. When did you start wanting to kind of transition that into, okay, how do I get on a team? How do I get on a proper team? How do I actually start playing for myself? When did all of that start?
It all started because back then, the area I was in and my school friends, everyone loved football.
Hmm.
And we used to play it all the time at lunchtime in school. And so that rush that you get from playing, it just drove me to say, pressure my parents. Yeah, I want to play. I want to play on the weekend. I want to, because it's when everyone knows that feeling when you're playing, you just forget about everything. You just get so indulged into the game. So it was probably from a young age, just wanting to play after that experience.
Yeah. So what specifically about football? I mean, obviously the fandom, it helps. Everybody around you is embracing it. But when you went out there and at lunchtime, right, you're kicking the ball around, you're starting to enjoy time with your friends around the sport. At some point, you had to maybe start thinking to yourself, I kind of want to do this more, right? More competitively. I want to, I don't know. Did you ever have dreams of being a pro footballer at all?
Yeah, for sure. I grew up a Man United supporter. My brothers were Man United supporters. My dad's actually Arsenal supporter. But watching them, I don't feel like you can watch Man United growing up, especially back then. It was around 2008, 2010, where Man United are winning the Premier League, they're winning the Champions League, they're winning everything, they're dominating. I don't think you can. When I was watching all of that, I was just like, yeah, I want to get to this level and play at this level, and you know, instead of go from playing, making those saves at lunchtime with all my guys, or playing on the Sunday league where I'm, making that catch and then booting the ball up the pitch on the small pitch to make an assist. All those different moments really inspire me and influence me to keep, pushing and have that dream of actually one day playing at the highest level possible.
Yeah, that's interesting. I like that a lot. I want to touch back on the Man United fandom because I think that there are a lot of new age fans here in America who see United for what they are today, right? And don't realize the fact that Manchester United are
Best club in the
arguably
world.
the biggest club in the world,
They
right?
are.
Biggest. I mean, and you can look at it from multiple perspectives, whether it's fandom, whether it's merchandise sales, whether it's just pure revenue that the club brings in. I would say the two biggest clubs in the world, from my perspective, as a Barcelona and Arsenal fan, which you can see from my background, are Manchester United and Real Madrid. I would arguably say those are the two biggest clubs on the planet, from a number of perspectives. So for maybe the newer American fan who can't see it, who's just like, no, Man United's barely making top four. They're not that big of a club. Manchester City maybe is bigger in their perspective. Um, can you describe what it was like to grow up as a Manchester United fan during the glory days?
It was just amazing because, everyone always over here in the States or even back then in Ireland, when they hear you support Man United back then, it was like, oh, you're a glory hunter, glory hunter. No, you don't really, you just support them. That's how all the fans are like whenever people say they support Man City now over here.
Yeah.
But back then, it was like my first ever Manchester United jersey was the AIG Man United, where they won the Champions League and
Yeah.
everything. Just wearing that out on the street or seeing someone wear that, everyone was just like, yeah, that person is a top dog because that's how much value. That's how much value and how good they were back then. Because everywhere you go, you'd see Man United, Man United, Man United, Premier League, Champions League, and for me, it was a no-brainer when I was younger.
Yeah, I think so. I think it, for most United fans, it probably was the same way, right? And then that turns into this admiration that most fans have for, of course, the players of yesteryear that were there at that time. You mentioned the AIG kit. I remember the AIG kit looking so clean because it had the white collar, the white cuffs around the sleeves. I was more of a long sleeve kit person. And then you had, of course, the players who were rocking them, right? The Rooney's, the
Ronaldo,
Ronaldos, and then you
yeah,
got Sir Alex Ferguson leading everything at the helm. Um, and then today you get a lot of comparisons, right, between Sir Alex Ferguson's teams and the teams of today, led by managers like Pep Guardiola, and the comparisons, right? Who's the greatest manager of all time, right? Who's led the better teams over the years? And I imagine, in a few years down the road, we'll look back at this and probably laugh a little bit and just realize that they were both honestly great managers, great teams, and each had their own respective success. But I think, for fans in America, we're still catching up. So, from your perspective, is Sir Alex Ferguson just the greatest manager to ever touch a football pitch?
yeah, 100%. As a Man United fan, yeah. Like even watching his documentary on Amazon Prime, just seeing the behind the scenes, he goes into depth about everything they go through and how he rivaled these players, the different tactics he used. Maybe put one player up against each other, using players as scapegoats. Evra, I think he's one of the greatest, but notwithstanding, I feel that there's so many great managers in a way in the world that's evolving now, especially in the Premier League. What Pep Guardiola is doing in terms of playing out from the back, taking
Yep.
it to a different level, the technology. But I know for sure that they've definitely taken a few notes from Alex's time, and even I would say even made it better and enhanced it to deal with the current demands of the game now. But no, for sure, I just feel like the way the Premier League is going, so many things are changing, so many things are improving, where managers are just constantly training, learning, driving the demands. Where there are a lot of managers that are getting to the level of Alex Ferguson in terms of the way to manage people, in terms of the way to produce results and high performance around the whole team.
Yeah, I agree. I think at the end of the day, that's why I kind of alluded to it a little bit before, right? I think comparisons between eras sometimes can be a fool's errand, right? Because at the end of the day, everything gets better over time. Everything does. The game, the science behind it, the technology that we have access to, that it just naturally improves what players can do on the pitch. I think it's unfair of managers, to make those comparisons, especially for managers of yesteryear, because at the end of the day, realistically, there's no way to tangibly compare the two. But I'm curious, going back to some of that Manchester United fandom, Tim Howard had his goalkeeping days at United back in the early 2000s. I think a lot of American fans, especially those who are my age, kind of the millennial age group and above, we hold Tim Howard in very high regard, not just for his days in the Premier League, not only with United but with Everton, but equally what he's done with the U.S. men's national team in major tournaments like the World Cup, where I think to this day he still holds the record for the most saves, right, by any keeper in our national team's
Yeah,
history in a big match. I think he had like in between 16, it was either 16 or 17 saves in that match against Belgium where we were knocked out in extra time. Um, do you, is as a keeper, is there any inspiration you take from keepers like Tim Howard, or even maybe you have another favorite keeper from, all of the days in which you followed United?
yeah. Tim Howard is definitely someone who I looked up to growing up. I started watching him when he was at Everton. That
Mm-hmm.
was around the time, Man United played against Everton, and he was quite big. I remember back in the day, we used to collect match attacks.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard of them over there, but yeah, match attacks where you get all these different players, 100 clubs, stuff like that. And Tim Howard was one of those big players.
Yep.
So I took a lot of inspiration. I still do. I always I watch him and listen to how he's doing, following his journey, because he really brought a raw, authentic his game. So I try, watch him and take some tips on how I can implement that. But another keeper that really inspired me to be a goalkeeper at the highest level was Edwin van der Sar at Man
Oh
United,
man, yeah,
who was, one of the best ever in my opinion. Following on from Tim Howard, Schmeichel, I feel like he was just so good when I was younger. So just the dream is obviously to emulate what those guys do, making those saves, making such a big impact on the pitch.
yeah, seriously. And look, making a big impact on the pitch. I'm glad that you mentioned that. I mean, obviously, those keepers that we just discussed have done just that their entire careers, and that's led to kind of where they are today. But look, man, we don't have. I'll be honest, we don't get very many keepers who come onto the show and talk about what it's like from their perspective. So often we've had previous, field players, right? And whether we're talking to a defender, a midfielder, or an attacker of some kind. For the most part, we get, I would say, somewhat similar perspectives of what they go through, the challenges they have to overcome, and realistically, what it's like to be on some kind of a competitive path to making this game a professional reality for you as a player. So I'm really, really curious from your perspective as a keeper. Let's talk to some of the fans who aspire to be pros, right? And in America, there's still so many fans who feel like it's a pipe dream, right? That even if I do make it, let's say here in the States, the game is 10 years behind where it is anywhere
Yeah.
else in the world. No real chances to make good
That's
money,
very
maybe.
interesting, to be fair.
Yeah. So how do you feel about that? Like from a keeper's perspective, if we're talking to those fans, how how would we address that, right? Like for the first perspective I want to look at is the work that you have to put in, and then second, realistically, is it more difficult to make it as a keeper versus making it as any sort of field player?
Yeah. So in terms of the workload, is very, very difficult for me. From my experience, it's like I had going through Ireland academy in those days, from Sunday League to academy to coming over here and playing Sunday League. I had all those raw attributes, making saves, being able to kick. But what really took my game to another level was when I signed for Chelsea when I was younger, where they put me through rigorous technical, tactical training that allowed me to develop the various different goalkeeper techniques that took my game to another level.
Hmm.
Because outfielders, they don't actually know the art of goalkeeping. There's actually a lot of, because outfielders, they've got their half turn pass, their first touch, the shooting techniques, all these
Yep.
different things. But in the goalkeeper's handbook, there's so many different save types, footwork patterns, specific techniques that you have to learn and develop and through repetition to master, so that whenever you have that one single action in the game, you're ready to deal with it effectively. So in that sense, is a very rigorous training program to make sure that for us goalkeepers, training is usually tougher than the game, because training is where we get in our reps. We get in our reps, and then on the game, we have to have that mental concentration and ability to be ready to actually make that one rep, which is game changing, which is so important. And what was the second question?
Yeah. So the second question is, realistically, well, I think you kind of answered it a little bit right then and there, Daniel, to be honest, right? The differences between, field players and just specifically some of the training that you go through. You mentioned training having to be significantly more difficult than than the matches themselves. I wholeheartedly agree. I think it needs to be that way, not just for the keepers. I think for field players too. I think if it's not that way, if the matches are significantly more difficult, I think probably a bit harsh for some folks. I think maybe you're not approaching training the right way. I think that maybe
Yeah,
you're either lazy about how you go about training, you're going through the motions, you're not really giving it every bit of your effort or putting in as much work as needed to make sure that you're prepared for the match day. Because at the end of the day, the match day should come together nicely. It needs to be right. It's you're going through the one-off situations that you've come across in training 1,000 times. That's ideally if you do it right, right? So, but I think from a keeper's perspective, is there between let's say something like your reactions versus I don't know, your positioning or anything else. Is there a specific trait as a keeper that a player back home that's watching this right now can take this and work on, that they should be working on? Is there one trait that or one skill that will really take a keeper's game to the next level? And if so, what is that?
So, from the context of football over here, is the ability to play with your feet. So, the ability to play with your feet and your mental resilience, which I think as a goalkeeper is critical. So over here, like, everyone knows, not just over here. If you're not able to play with your feet nowadays as a modern day goalkeeper, you won't get picked up, or we won't be able to play at the highest level, because nowadays you have to play as like another midfielder. So that is one. And then secondly, your mental resilience. Watching me over here, watching the Premier League or even the World Cup recently, you see goalkeepers make a mistake and the whole world is on them. They have to deal with all these pressures and they have to still perform. It's always been like that, but it's getting increasingly difficult with social media and everything. So you've got to have that bulletproof mentality, either through working with sports psychologists to develop your coping mechanism in those situations.
Yeah.
And yeah, just to make sure you're ready.
Can you tell us a story about a moment where you mentioned, right, the world comes down on you? I agree. Keepers, it's the most unfair position in the sport. You could have a perfect game. You can make save after save. And I think about like if anybody, you know, we're recording this on May 25th. Most recently, there was that Champions League tie between Real Madrid and Manchester City. And I think that it was so unfair to look at the stat sheet after the game from Courtois' perspective, because he made so many saves. You could argue that City would have walked away with like 7-8-0 and if it wasn't for Courtois. Because he kept them in the game so much. I mean, Real Madrid had chances solely because Courtois was able to come up massive in very key moments. Do you have a story like that where maybe you did everything you could, you still, you know, the goals sometimes just go in, right? Nothing you can do about them in certain scenarios, in certain matches, and maybe the blame came down on you a little bit, right? That resiliency you're talking about from a keeper's perspective, is there a moment that you remember in your playing career where you had to show that because of just the scenario, because of what happened and how the match unfolded from your perspective?
Yeah. So a recent experience of that is probably when I played in the trial game last year. When I was on trial for a team abroad, and we played against Union Berlin in a preseason fixture game where it was quite a big game. They were taking a look at me. They were like, let's bring him in, see what he's got against this big opposition. So we played against Union Berlin in Germany in front of 20,000 fans in their stadium. And going into the game, the team I was playing for were underdogs, so no one really expected anything, but there was still high pressure, high demand. So
Yeah.
we ended up going 1-0 down, and 1-0 down in the first half. And it was a good strike from them where top half of the goal, but because I got a touch on it at half time, the manager comes into the change room, grilling the guys, and he's saying, I think you should have saved that. And
Wow.
yeah, he was like, he was trying to put it on me. And obviously, after conceding that goal, it was frustrating because I'm on trial. He's saying that, and in front of that all those big fans, to deal with that, I had to really use my coping mechanisms that I've developed so that I wouldn't now go, catch catastrophize that situation where it's like I'm on trial, I've let in this goal. What are they gonna think about me? Oh, how am I gonna do the next action? I shouldn't let the pressure like overwhelm me. So I had to stop after that goal went in, use my breathing techniques and my positive self-talk of come on, Dan, next one. And just using those different things, I was able to, go on and still perform in the game, make some saves in the game, and do myself justice on the trial. So that was
That's
just one experience.
Yeah, man, that's great. I think that it's sometimes it's very difficult to bounce back. And I think that I have somewhat of a similar experience, I guess you could say. Not, I mean, obviously, I was a defender. I was a right fullback coming up, and and even at times at a shorter center back. But I had a moment where a scout came to watch a game. A university scout came to watch a game, and I knew they were coming, right? And it was a big game against a big local rival. That's why they were showing up to that game. And uh, we were one of the better teams statewide as far as, our region was considered. And it's one of those matches, I think, where and you probably know this as a keeper, as a high level player yourself, you have sometimes those days where everything goes wrong. Everything goes wrong. There's like nothing you can really do about it. It's just one of those days you can't really explain how it panned out that way. And I honestly had the opposite reaction of you. And I to this day I'm still somewhat ashamed of it because as a captain of that team, in a moment I had a moment of weakness. I lost my cool. Um, I was very, very vocal, very frustrated with my team and how we were playing. We went down 2-0, and we prided ourselves as defense on being a team that just held a clean sheet, did not get scored on. We were down 2-0 inside of 30 minutes. And but at halftime, I remember coming off the pitch, and like there was this table of everything, bags and medical supplies and all kinds of things. I just grabbed it and flipped it and walked into the locker room, and I was subbed off at halftime because I had lost my head, and I went to go see that scout the next day. And he saw it. He saw everything, and it didn't change his opinion of me too much. But he just realized that I needed to coach myself on how to cope with situations more fluidly, right? How to deal with situations in a way that wasn't toxic to the rest of my team, because he appreciated that I was that passionate, but it wasn't going to help us bounce back from being down 2-0, right? None of that. If anything, I was hurting my team more. So I feel like I probably could have used that sound positive self-talk that you were kind of going through, those coping mechanisms, those breathing techniques that you were bringing to the table. When it comes to how you learned how to do those things at a young age, does the I don't know, overseas, do they really emphasize that? Because here, I'll be honest, man, I feel like it's more about the physical. I feel like it's more about what can you accomplish for me on the pitch versus any other mental or emotional aspect of the game as far as coaching is considered. So from that standpoint, do they really emphasize those types of techniques at a high level where you play?
Yeah, I think they really do. It's not as much as before, but it's getting really better in England, where they're prioritizing player care, their well-being, developing those mental skills. So for me, coming through the academy system, when I was at Chelsea, when I was in the Chelsea academy, I struggled a lot with that as a young goalkeeper, where after I'd made those mistakes, I'd beat myself up so heavily, how go into that negative self-talk, and that would affect my next action in the training, my next action in the game, where I wouldn't be able to perform now because I'm still dwelling on those previous things. And that was completely messing up my game. But, luckily at Chelsea, and then even when I left Chelsea to go to West Ham, they had sports psychologists. So I was able to, it was not until I signed when I was at West Ham during my scholar period from the ages of 16 to 18, where I worked with the sports psychologist there. And she observed those situations of me not dealing with a mistake or conceding a goal incorrectly. And I was able to have sessions with her she was able to like really break it down to me, saying, okay, cool. How can you deal with that in a better way? What works for you? She gave me various different exercises to try and test out. And those breathing techniques and the self-talk, those are a few things that I found came natural to me in order to cope with it. So it's becoming big, and it's even something that I want to use post my career. From that experience I had, obviously, in the academy system, working with that sports psychologist, it completely transformed my game and the direction of my development, because then instead of dwelling on those things and then it affected my performance, I'm now able to have those coping mechanisms to say that I'm able to perform now, irregardless of conceding, regardless of making that mistake. It's allowed me to have that stoic perspective of, okay, cool, not letting anything phase me, and having that bulletproof mentality that is so necessary for goalkeepers to have. So that's why I'm studying psychology alongside my football, which has helped it massively. So then in the future, after my career in football, I want to, use my experience in football as well as my qualification in psychology to help the next generation of athletes to, take their psychology, their mental performance to the next level.
I like that, man. I like that a lot. So to clarify, for those who are listening, right, you've mentioned a couple different clubs there, Chelsea, West Ham. How many clubs have you had a pro trial with?
Oh, a lot.
Who are some of the biggest ones?
A lot. Wow. Biggest ones now. I've been at I've been to Chelsea, West Ham, Tottenham. I've been to AC Milan. I've been to Southampton, Birmingham, West Brom. Like a lot.
A
Quite
lot.
a few, yeah.
Yeah.
Just
And the reason I'm asking that question, right, is because obviously you put in a ton of work to continue getting those opportunities, right? Because I can think of who knows how many players, right, don't even get more than a handful of opportunities trial wise to continue showing what they can bring to a team. I feel like this is an important moment, maybe for the audience member who really wants to be on that path to pro, but just doesn't even know where to begin, right? So if you could kind of paint a picture, how did all of these trials with these clubs really even start? Did you have to know someone who could make introductions? Was it simply just whenever one trial would end, you had another one lined up? From your perspective, how do these opportunities continue to arise?
Yeah, so it's all about, for me, from my experience, it's been about um my CV,
Hmm.
my experience, and being scouted. Ever since I was scouted, I performed, and then I signed for Chelsea through my performances and the different things I was involved in, and then Chelsea helping me out on sending my CV across to various different clubs because I played for them, and maybe they weren't when they weren't offering me another contract, they helped me, send some of my clips and my CVs out, which provided those opportunities for me. But in terms of how I keep on getting them is leveraging your network, which I think is so important because it's all about who you know. They don't. It's they say your network is your net worth, and it's a key thing in life that I had to learn. I'm just coming to realize now as I get older is that there's a lot of opportunity. People might. I've seen a lot of guys who get opportunities that might not be as talented or as good because they might know that specific agent. So it's all about just putting yourself out there, leveraging the different people and providing value. Because when people see the value, because at that time when I was going all those trials, I was playing for Chelsea and I was playing for England. So I was an England goalkeeper. So then I was at that point I was quite in demand. So that's where all those opportunities come from. But even currently now, what allows me to get those opportunities is leveraging my previous CV, plus putting my clips online, so to show people what I can actually do, just to get that foot in the door.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I think it also makes it easier, right? That there isn't, maybe I'm wrong, right? But there isn't some sort of hard cost attached to all of these opportunities that you get, right? It's purely based on the talent that you have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think in this country we're so blessed and privileged, and even looking back on it is a real blessing to do that, because I know for a fact if I was still in Ireland and my family didn't migrate over to England, those opportunities would not have been there. So yeah, it's a real, looking back on it, it's a real blessing, because I know for a fact there's a lot of people who maybe can't afford the transport, the equipment, the playing fees, the various different things that withdraws it. But I feel like that's why I feel like England's quite an amazing place to develop talent, because they have that infrastructure to nurture that talent, regardless of where they come from or what they're doing.
Do you think that maybe holds America back from your perspective? The whole pay to play model and the fact that you need to honestly make a certain amount of money to be able to qualify to play for against higher competition. That's just kind of how it works in this country. That's the biggest barrier to entry, which blows my mind, because I feel like football is a sport of the people, right? You don't really need much to play, and the fact that children and families are being monetized here in America in that way, it's never really sat well with me. But equally, I will say that I don't know if that's the only thing that is holding us back in terms of, America being a true power on the world football stage. But from your perspective, is that it, or is it deeper than that?
I think it's definitely a big issue, or a big cause, because when you have to pay, it's limiting, because you see, for example, over here in the streets of London, there's so many Premier League players that came from those maybe less fortunate streets of London, that, for example, if they weren't picked up by those academies and brought into that high performance system, they wouldn't be at the level they are today. There's so many stories of world class players, Mbappe, Ronaldo, so many guys who they come from those less fortunate backgrounds, and if they had that paywall in front of them, they wouldn't have realized their potential. So in order for football in America to get to that level where they're developing those talented individuals, they've got to find a way to obviously go around that.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult. I don't know how we get around it, to be honest, because it's just how so many coaches and directors are all compensated, and I get it. Like, we have to grow to a certain point as a sport before we can start having some long tail revenue opportunities that don't have to come from the players and the families.
Yeah, it's quite similar to the women's game over here, because over here, the women's game, they literally have a paywall where the expenses that they have from actually playing outweigh the benefits. So I feel like,
Really?
yeah. So over here, it's literally just a men's game that gets a lot of funding, a lot of support. But when I'm speaking to female footballers who are play for West Ham and all these different clubs, they get nowhere near the same amount of support as the male game, and it limits them quite a lot.
Where does the
And
funding come from? Is this strictly club owners, or like where does the funding for the academy part really come from?
oh, it comes from a lot of different places. Premier League, biggest like contest in football,
Sure.
comes from clubs, merchandise, ticketing,
So
a
that
lot of
all
different
that all
things.
plays a part.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
And
because
and
it's not, it's business at the end of the day. Because of the demand drives the value, the cost,
mhm.
and that's the issue over here where the demand is not as high in the women's game, but it's increasing, it's improving since the women's Euros recently and the World Cup this summer. That the demand is increasing, and then the the remuneration for the women's game is increasing. And now a lot of clubs are developing academies because the game is getting gradually bigger and bigger. So it provides more support for those talented players to actually come through.
Interesting. Yeah. And I'm sure what also probably helps too, now that I really think about it, we're having this conversation. I think the open ecosystem in which you guys operate is massive, right? Like because then from a business standpoint, you get interest. You get interest from other people who have deep pockets that want to come in and be a part of the emotional roller coaster that is the football pyramid, right? Because of promotion, relegation, and everything else that you guys have in place. And I remember my first experience as an American sports fan, right? Again, just to give you the full scenario, I grew up on basically nothing but football. My family are generationally Barcelona fans. I didn't even know it was called soccer till I was a little bit older. But with that said, like when I was introduced to American sports, I remember thinking, oh, okay, so what happens to the bottom teams when they finish bottom? Like nothing. They're just kind of there, right? In fact, in some sports, professional sports, they get a draft pick, to even the table. They get a draft pick in next year's draft of the talent that's coming in, and they'll get first pick, and hopefully they make a good pick to kind of bolster their squad and get back to where they need to be. But that's really it. There's no other incentive from the audience's perspective to be invested in teams in the middle or the bottom of the table towards the end of the season, unless you're invested in the draft pick, I guess you could say. But it was just it always so mind-boggling to me, right? But I imagine that helps a little bit from a business standpoint when it comes to not just the Premier League but European football in general. Um, Daniel, do you have any thoughts on the open ecosystem? Does America need that, the promotion relegation system, in order to take football or soccer to a place where it's going to be not just a top 5 sport where it is today, but maybe a top 2 sport or a top sport in this country?
Definitely. I think that's what drives the commercialization of the sport. That it's based on emotions. It builds that culture, that religiosity around the
Mhm.
games where fans support their clubs wholeheartedly with their whole life
Yep.
because there's something at stake. I feel like if there's nothing at stake, it won't really evoke that emotion. Well, we've seen it where the fans, or a lot of football was cancelled during COVID and everything. Revenue goes down. The over here, the Premier League had to provide financial support to a range of different people because they weren't competing for anything anymore.
Yep.
So I think it's very important.
Yeah, I think it is. I think with the promotion relegation, a lot of fans are saying, and mainly some of these fans are close to the club, saying that it's never going to happen, mainly because the owners of the first iteration of Major League Soccer, or whatever the case may be, have already put so much money in, right? They've already paid franchise fees in the millions of dollars to get their clubs, to get the city of their choice. and have bought into this franchise model in such a deep manner that it's impossible to go back. But I kind of refuse to believe that. I think that if we really want it to happen, if we really want the sport to grow, I think we need it, right? And there will be some clubs that unfortunately have to close their doors. There just will. You see it every now and then. If a club's too small and they can't survive, not being in the top division, I think it's a small price to pay for the greater good, which in this scenario would be the sport reaching its true potential in terms of fandom. Do you feel like, and I know you've been to the States previously, you understand what it's like here, you understand that soccer or football just isn't the NBA, it's not the NFL, it's culturally those sports are on another level. But do you think that America can get there? In your opinion, do you think that in the next 5 to 10 years, or even with the 2026 World Cup coming to North America, do you think by then America will have its own sort of footy culture?
100%. For me, going to the GA Cup, just that experience alone, it showed me that wow. Because before going there, I never knew football was that big over there.
Mm-hmm.
So visiting Dallas FC, the stadium there, playing against all these different clubs in America, FC Dallas. We played against quite a few, and the facilities, the quality. Even then, back then, we were under 18s, under 17s, and we had so many fans watching all of our games. I went with West Ham, so there was so many American West Ham fans that were cheering us on each of the games, and even against FC Dallas and Miami. It was an amazing experience, and for me, I think it's definitely possible. From that experience, showed me that American football is big in America.
Yeah, that's great. That's great to hear. In all honesty, what was your experience like with the GA Cup overall? So for those who are listening, Generation Adidas Cup, arguably now, I would say now it's starting to overtake Dallas Cup as like probably the biggest international youth football tournament. Here stateside. So what was that experience like traveling with your teammates over to America and competing against not just teams in America, but North America as a whole? We get teams from Canada, from Mexico coming to that tournament as well.
I think it was one of the highlights of my international tours that I've been on growing up, because they really did well. Well, we had like a real insight into the history of football in America, having the Dallas FC tour, Adidas and Generation Cup, the way they treated us, where we stayed, the interaction we had with other teams. So we were able to interact with other teams. There was a specific Adidas room where they had various different activities like foosball, tech ball table. We were playing against other teams from other countries, and yeah, there's so many great things from that experience. Even to end it all off, to end off the tournament, there was a big award ceremony where all the teams were able to mingle and interact with each other, and yeah, it was good.
I love that, man. I love it. Yeah, I remember my Dallas Cup days, and I think it's something similar, right? Where you just want to bring all of these countries, all of these players to one table, and just embrace the fact that football is bigger than ourselves. That we're so isolated to like the local teams that we play, the regional teams that we play, and we don't realize that football is a sport that touches everybody. And at a youth level, I think that's an important lesson to learn. So the GA Cup for me was always a ton of fun, very highly competitive. I think only the best players really get an invitation to that tournament, the best teams. And I know from being here stateside, it was always kind of a chip on our shoulder, right? Could we prove ourselves against the teams who were coming in from overseas and show that there was more that America could show than just being a team or a country that kind of embraced the sport. You know what I mean? So yeah, man. Now, anyway, I think in terms of your youth career, where you've been up to this point, how you got there, the work you had to put in, I think all of that has been on full display up to this point in the podcast. I know we're getting a little bit close to time here, but to kind of sort of wrap things up, I really want to go into your content creation career? Because I think you mentioned a lot, right? All this work that you put in, the numerous trials with who knows how many different clubs, how competitive it is to be not just a player, but a keeper on your side of the world. I can only imagine that your time, your bandwidth is limited. Yet you're choosing to create content. Yet you're choosing to put in all this work on the side to give yourself a brand on the internet, and a place to share everything you know about this game. Where did that come from? Like, were you watching other YouTubers and other content creators and thought maybe you could do this too? Or did you feel like you just needed to kind of tell your story?
Yeah, so it all came from, I never imagined myself to be a YouTuber, or to even make content, but it all came from, I signed my professional contract at West Ham. And as a scholar at West Ham, I continued my education. Because over here, we don't have to continue with our, I don't know whether you guys call it high school or final years of high school or college.
Yep.
When we sign a scholarship over here, we can choose to only do like a small little course on the side, but I choose to do an extra A level. So I did an A level in psychology alongside my full-time scholarship at West Ham. And then
Wow.
after completing that and then signing my professional contract, I wanted to go on and do further education and study at university, psychology at university as a first year pro. But um I was this close to not doing it because there wasn't really anyone in England balancing pro football with further education. So I was like,
And for those who don't know, right? Just to clarify what Daniel's saying, it's not like here in the States where you can do both. You have to choose, right? Like, it's not here where you can get a scholarship to play at a university, play 4 years of college ball or university ball while you're getting your degree in overseas, right, Daniel? You kind of have to pick one or the other.
yeah, that's it. So because of that fact that it was so stigmatized to go on to further education over here, I I still pushed through just because I was like, okay, cool, let me just continue with my education because I've come this far.
Hmm.
So after 6 months of doing that, I was struggling quite a bit to balance both. I still found there was no role models online for me to look to show, okay, cool, they're doing this successfully and they've actually gone on to do this. So I was just, there was something pressing on me to say, okay, cool, let me change the game. Let me be that role model online and document my journey of balancing my football and university. So January 2021, I started my YouTube channel with the idea of just showing people that it's possible to balance, high level football with university, and just to express and show people that in England and in other sports, in football and in the whole world, that it's important to have an identity beyond football. So since then, I've just been creating content centered around um, how I balance football and university, days in the lives of professional football and university, which over here is unheard of. I still get so much stigma, so much stick for all this stuff because it's just crazy. Because I done a podcast episode on the Beyond Football podcast with a lady who played in the States and she's over here for university for her masters, and she was like, when she heard about um players not having to do further education over it, she was completely stunned, which for me was surprising because it's so normal. So
Interesting.
through all that content, I just want to keep being that role model so people see that, okay, I can go and do it. Because before, people would just be they'll be like me, where they were like, they didn't want to go and do that course alongside their football because they thought that it would withhold them. But I'm trying to change the narrative and say that no, it's not gonna restrict you. It's actually gonna benefit you because it gives you that identity beyond your football and provides more opportunities for you once your career finishes.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think that you do a really good job of kind of painting that picture on your YouTube channel. To be honest, right? So let's talk about it a little bit. And we'll talk about the Beyond Football podcast as well. But from your perspective, I feel like you're already trying to do that, debunk some myths, paint a realistic picture for the opportunities you can have as a footballer who's also pursuing other passions on the side. And you give a very realistic view of what it's like to go through all of that from your perspective. So, with the channel, for those who haven't tuned in before, what can they expect when they come visit Daniel Jinadu on YouTube?
Well, you can expect a real insight into the journey of a professional footballer from a goalkeeper's perspective and from the perspective of balancing it with education. In my videos, I give just insights into what actually goes on through the days of a professional football club over here in the United Kingdom. And as well as that, I give people an insight into my journey, like not just the highs where I'm, doing well. I've done a few series on when I've been released from my clubs. So when I was released from West Ham, didn't get offered another contract after being a pro there for a few years. Just taking them through that trial period where I was on trial at another club, seeing what actually goes on behind the scenes, because I think it's important, because a lot of people, especially over here in England, they see release. Release is a big thing, because once you get released, it's like your social currency goes down. Everyone who sees you as a footballer, they don't respect you as much because you're not at that club.
Wow.
And it has a seriously detrimental effect on players, where some players have unfortunately committed suicide after release from club. So I'm just trying to once again change that narrative of actually showing people, look, I've been released, but I'm going to take you guys along the journey with me. This is what I went through. And then thankfully, after that series, after I got released from West Ham, I signed a contract. So through that series, I signed a contract for a professional football club at Barnsley FC in the EFL Championship. So just a few things like that, where they can find videos like that, and they can find some episodes of the Beyond Football podcast that I do with various different footballers that I grew up playing with. One of the people I've had on there was your very own Yunus Musa, who plays for USA national team. So I grew up playing against Yunus when he was at Arsenal, and I played with him when he was at Cheltenham. When I played with him in the England under 15s and under 16s international youth teams. So that's how I know him there. So I've had him on my Beyond Football podcast, where he's given insights into his experience of playing against Messi, Ronaldo, Marcelo, and just asking him that question of who he is beyond football.
Yeah, man. I think, and everything you just mentioned right there, those stories that you have, right? Those experiences that you're sharing, those are moments that you really don't have to share, and you're doing it anyway. And I think that, I think for any footy fan who feels like, no one's doing a good job out there of documenting a realistic view of what a player goes through day in and day out on this very lonely road of trying to make it as a pro. I think that your channel is a perfect representation of what you can go through, right? Not every scenario, but at the end of the day, if you want a realistic view that you can take home and actually use, right? Use some of the learnings for yourself to kind of better your game, whether that's mentally or physically. I think this is a great channel to tune into. Before we wrap up, a couple more questions. I have one I'm curious off the top of my mind, just as a sort of fun question. As a keeper who's trialed for several different pro clubs, is there a team or maybe even a player that was the most difficult for you to come up against? I'm personally just curious, right? What was that experience like, and who really was it?
Ooh. Trialed and trained again. I think potentially one player from my experience of training with West Ham first team was Saeed Benrahma.
Wow.
Benrahma, he was just very, very techy, flary, sharp, where as a goalkeeper, if you're not on your toes, if you're not set already, he'll just finish it and then you've got no chance. And he just shows the high level of technical skill, the speed, everything. Like it was just training with him. It was a joke. It showed you the level that, wow, it's crazy.
Yeah, I man, you see it on display every weekend, right? I mean, with the first team, I mean, Benrahma is, I mean, I think he's kind of their go-to guy for most things now as an attacker, right? Whether he's taking a penalty kick or one of the set pieces, and and of course just finds a way to kind of stamp his game on every single match that he comes into. I can only imagine playing against that man in training. Guy's got to be all over the place.
Yeah, it was long.
Awesome, man. So, and look, the last thing I really want to kind of ask is, I think you have so much experience you can offer, not just through your YouTube channel, but just firsthand experience. And we talked about a lot about that today. For anybody who stuck around to the end of the episode and they're looking for maybe one piece of advice, right? If you had to kind of reach your hand backwards and offer one piece of advice to an aspiring pro or an aspiring content creator for that matter, right? Is there a single piece of advice that you would give to that person to help maybe steer them, get them back on the right path, help them figure out where they want to do and how they want to be a part of this game long term?
Yeah. I would say cultivate discipline and forget motivation. That is something that I've learned the hard way growing up, or I think it's so important for where I am today, is that despite those rejections, despite those injuries, despite those setbacks, everything, just be disciplined in those small details in pursuing excellence in everything. In goalkeeping, it's a real fine art of specific things that you've got to concentrate and focus on. So every single day, just focus on perfecting your craft and being disciplined with it all. And in terms of content creation, I would say once you find your why, for me, it's a constant mental battle between just posting content and withholding that content because of the view of not wanting to be stigmatized by the people around me or stereotyped or laughed at or painted as this black sheep who's doing too much, who's being too busy. As a content creator, you've got to, it's something I'm still learning constantly. You've got to disregard what other people might think or the effect that might have on you, and continue to post that quality content because you know who you're trying to target. You know the purpose that you want to reach and the difference that you want to make. So just keep going once you know that why and keep creating that content. Don't let it stop you.
I love it, man. And I would say that probably also applies to the footy part of it all too. Don't let it stop you. Whatever those obstacles may be, if you feel like this is where you need to be and where all roads lead to, keep going. And I love what you mentioned there about cultivating discipline. I've never really thought about it that way, but the little things compound immensely over time if you do them for long enough. So I couldn't have said it better myself, Daniel. Look, I think this is a great episode, man. I enjoyed this interview so much. I think that we could probably sit here and talk for hours. I genuinely feel that way. But hopefully we'll get another chance to, right? Hopefully we'll have you back on the pod at a later time. And I know that, not too much of a teaser, right? But hopefully I'll be able to kind of join you on your Beyond the Football podcast and tell more powerful stories, hopefully from an American's perspective. So again, Daniel, thank you so much for being on the show today, man. I really appreciate it. This was a ton of fun. I feel like I learned so much more about you, and I think our audience did too, man. And there's a lot to take away from this episode. So, all right, guys, perfect. For anybody who's around to the end of the episode, I really appreciate you. If you haven't done so already, like the video down below, subscribe to the channel, and look, keep an eye out for Daniel's channel as well. The link to Daniel Jinadu's channel on YouTube is linked down below in the description notes. Go check it out. Go sub to the channel. He's already 2,000. Like I said before, it's going to be at 10,000 before we know it. And especially if you're a keeper, there's more than enough for you to unpack there in terms of value. All right, so go check that out. All right, Daniel, Jinadu, I really appreciate it, man. Thank you so much for coming on the pod today. For everybody who stuck around, my name is Jose Tejas. Thank you so much for tuning into Box to Box. We'll catch you guys next time.
Thank you very much.